name is LoG, and welcome to another edition of LoG Power-Ups. Today's power-up, we will play everyone's favorite technique, sweep picking, in particular, the 6-string variant. So we will learn two pretty simple shapes that will run through all 6 strings. This power-up will be split into parts 1, 2, 3, and then the final part, with each video ending with a backing track that gradually increases tempo. If you enjoy this type of instructional material, feel free to check out my Patreon at the link below. And now let's get on to part 1. Okay, let's get started by learning the two shapes that pretty much make up the entirety of this power-up. And both of these shapes are very common shapes that you've probably played or played something similar to. And they both start with the classic super power chord, as I like to call it, or really 2 fifths, 2 stacked fifths on top of each other. And the notes or the numbers that you're really playing are really 1, 5, and 2. Very, very, very common shapes that a lot of people use. We're going to play a major version of that as well as a minor version. So let's go over the major version first. Again, starts with 1, 5, 2. I'm doing it here on the 5th fret. In this video, we will play it on the 5th fret, but in the final video, we'll be doing it all over the place. So we'll just practice it here for now. So 1, 5, 2, that's A, E, B. And then continuing with 3, 6, 3 on the G, B, E strings. Just like that. That's C sharp, F sharp, C sharp. So the whole thing, 1, 5, 2, 3, 6, 3. Just like that. Very, very easy to play because the fingering is always just pointer, middle, pinky, pointer, middle, pinky. So this one flows really well. Okay, of course, up and back. Just like that. Notice I'm repeating the outer notes. I'm repeating the low E string and the high E string because that's how we're going to play it. Just to keep it nice and easy for the right hand because you're really just going to play all 6 strings, turn around, play all 6 strings just like that, nice and easy. And we'll talk about the right hand here in a second. And then the minor shape is almost exactly the same. Starts on 1, 5, 2, just like we did before, but now we're playing flat 3, of course, because we're playing minor, flat 7, and then 2. So those notes would be A, E, B, like we just did, and then C natural, G natural, B natural, or of course B natural. The fingering that I'm using for that one is the beginning is exactly the same, but then pointer, ring, middle. You can, of course, do pointer, pinky, ring, or something like that. I'll leave the fingering up to you, but that's what I'm doing. Just like that. So if I play them back to back, major, minor, very typical, very popular sounds, etc. So when in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to play the major shape right here on the 5th fret twice, then we'll move it up a fret, play it twice, and then we'll go back a fret, play the minor one twice, up a fret, minor one twice, etc. So that'll sound like this. Up a fret right here, back a fret, minor, up a fret, minor, back a fret, major, and we continue just like that. That's for this video. In the final video, it will be slightly different. We'll be switching sometimes on the top, sometimes on the bottom, but for this video, that's all you need to know. And keep in mind, when I'm doing that doubling note on the E string, sometimes I'm just, of course, playing it twice. Other times I'm playing it once and then using that next pick stroke to move up the fret, etc. It's pretty straightforward. Once you get it down, it'll flow really comfortably. So with all of that in mind, that's pretty much the shape. Pretty cool sounds. Let's now talk about what the right hand is doing in particular when we're doing this sweeping motion. Okay, so let's go over a couple technical things just to make sure we're all on the same page in regards to this technique. You probably already know how to do this, but in case you don't, there are a couple things we do need to talk about. So in general, the technique is simply this. You're taking your pick and letting the pick flow through all of the strings that you mean to play. So this is a 6-string shape, so I'm letting my pick fall through all 6 strings. And then on the other direction, I'm pulling the pick back through all 6 strings, just like that. That is the technique. What is not happening is I'm not picking every string like this. You can see as I do that, I'm like just doing a downstroke for every string. That is not what we're doing here because that, whenever you pick a string, there are multiple things happening. You're of course picking the string, but often you are then lifting the pick out this way to clear that string and move on to the next one. That is not what we're doing here. There is no lifting motion. We are literally just sitting on the string, picking it, falling into the next one, falling into the next one, falling into the next one. There's no lifting out motion. That's actually the most important thing about this technique because that's what makes this technique work. It makes this technique effortless, which is the whole point of why people do this in the first place. It's physically very, very easy to do because all you're doing is just following through. If you can go like this with your hand or like that, that's pretty much the technique. There's nothing else really happening, as opposed to alternate picking or hammer-ons and pull-offs and whatnot. This technique is supposed to be physically very easy to play. So if you feel like you're doing excess motion, you need to take a look at your hand and make sure you're not doing this kind of lifting out motion or moving in a way that is not necessary, because you're literally just falling down or pulling it back up that way. So that's the technique. A couple things to make it a little bit easier that a lot of people do. The first thing is to tilt the pick in the direction that you are moving. So if I'm moving this way, I'm going to tilt my pick just a little bit that way as I slide through. That allows the pick to not get caught, because if I'm doing this straight on like that, you can see my pick kind of getting caught like that, and that will require me to lift out. And remember, we're not trying to do that. We want to just flow through. So a little tilt of the pick will accomplish that. And then, of course, if you're going this way, a tilt of the pick in the opposite direction. How much of the pick you tilt, like how far your tilt is honestly up to you. Just experiment, find, what works best for your technique. So that's the main thing. Another thing you might want to try when you are doing this is, especially when you're going down this way, there's a good chance that you might hear some kind of residual vibrating happening when you lift your fingers off, especially on those low strings. So if I do a passage, or I run that major shape that we just did, check this out. So you hear that extra sound happening right there? That's me. I'm picking through everything. I did it pretty slow, but you still heard some extra ringing, and you'll definitely hear that if you have distortion on. I don't really have much on right now, so it's kind of quiet, but you'll definitely hear that. And what you want to do is get rid of that, because the more of that extra vibration you're hearing, the dirtier or messier it's going to sound. So I would recommend you try to, there's a lot of different muting techniques. Everyone kind of does their own thing. Personally, I think when you're going down like this, I would try to take this part of your palm and gently touch the strings once you get to the higher set of strings to make sure those thick strings don't vibrate. Those are always the ones that tend to be the loudest with this residual vibrating kind of thing. So just make sure that's muted when you move to the top, something like this. So notice you don't hear anything, because by the time I get to the top, my thumb is actually on the strings to prevent any of that muting from happening. So that's one thing you can do. And then on the way back, I find you don't really have to do too much muting with the right hand, because it's a lot easier to mute with the left hand. Like when I'm coming down, my pointer finger right here is muting all of the strings underneath it as it moves down, which makes the muting a lot easier when you're when you're descending in pitch. So those are the main things when you're practicing this. Something to think about, something to take note of when you're playing. Muting might not be a problem for you. However you're doing it, maybe muting's not an issue. Or if you want to use one of those fret wraps that you just kind of throw on your fretboard, then you won't have to worry about muting whatsoever. But it is something that I would try to think about, because you might run into that issue. Another thing that you're probably noticing as we've been talking about this technique and as you've watched me play is I'm actually not doing the down sweep like that. I'm actually not very good at this. I used to be way better at it, but as my technique has evolved over the years, I have decided to not really do that for whatever reason. Personally, right now, I happen to like better the pick and finger method, which the way I'm doing it for 6 strings is pick, middle, ring, and then again pick, middle, ring for the bottom 3. So I'm really picking these 3 strings and then those 3 strings, like that. So if I do that shape, I'm actually doing this. Here's the normal down sweep. Here's the way I do it. Now, I like it better. It flows a little bit more comfortable for me. I like the note separation, which is something that we'll talk about here in a second. You don't have to do this, but if you want to experiment with it, by all means, give it a shot. And the way that I would actually do this exact exercise, if you're doing just normal sweep up and down, it's literally 6 strings down, 6 strings up, and that's all you're doing. But for me, if I'm doing pick and fingers, I will do this. Normal pick fingers, like that, pick, middle, ring, pick, middle, ring. And then on the way back, I will do a downstroke and then the one single upward sweep to get the rest of the 5 strings. I'm actually not doing a 6-string sweep right there. That would look like this. And then upstroke right there. I can do that. It's not bad, but I personally like to feel this note on the downbeat, and I like doing that with the downstroke. It's just more comfortable for me. Sometimes I can do it better than others, but that's the technique. Also depends on how long my nails are, etc. So you can experiment with this type of thing. I don't know if it's the better choice of the two, doing that or using pick and fingers, but you can experiment. You might like it. I like it personally, but I'll let you figure out what to do for your own technique. So with that in mind, let's go over a couple other things that are really important when you're practicing this stuff to make sure that you always sound clean. So there are two things that I think are very important when practicing this technique to make sure that whenever you use it, you sound clean and controlled and whatnot. And those two things are timing and note definition. The timing part is probably the most important because if your timing is good, everything else will kind of line up. And this is really why this technique is difficult in the first place. It's the timing of it and it's synchronizing both hands. And the reason why it's hard is if we take something like alternate picking, right? If I just go like this, it's very easy, or at least easier, to notice our timing because we are in control of every single pick stroke, right? We can slowly speed up, slowly slow down, whatever we need to do to match the tempo, and we can really feel it because our hand is doing every single pick stroke. But when we are doing the sweep technique, we can't really feel every string because we're really just doing one motion to take care of the group of strings that we're playing, in this case, all 6 strings. So it feels a little weird because we can't feel every string, which is probably why a lot of people, when they first start this technique, they want to do this, actually like pick every string. But remember, that's not what we're doing. So the timing issue is a thing. And really the main thing you need to do is just memorize exactly how far your hand needs to move, what it feels like, how fast you need to move your hand to play at whatever tempos. And I think the best way to do that is to turn on a metronome, turn on a backing track or whatever, and just simply play dead notes. And that's it. So it'll be like this. Just do that. And of course, I'm doing it really slow, and that's how you should play it, which we'll talk more about in a second. But definitely notice all of your tendencies. Everyone is going to have tendencies when they're doing this. Like for me, I know I tend to have a tendency to speed up ever so slightly once I hit the G string and the B strings. So maybe, my hand is used to the thickness of these strings, so it kind of, puts a little bit more effort into picking those. But then when I get to the top strings, they're thinner, and maybe my hand is putting too much energy and I flow through those strings a little too fast. That tends to be a tendency for me. Maybe some people, it's like turning around. Maybe you tend to do it too fast on the turnaround. Whatever the things are, you need to really pay attention to those tiny details because that's how you polish this stuff and make it sound, consistent and smooth all the time. So that's one thing I would do. Another thing that helps me is when I'm doing this, I will pick the string and then rest on the next string right below me. So instead of just like moving through like this and just kind of freely moving my hand, I'm really picking and resting on the next string because when I feel that string, I feel, okay, I'm ready to go, ready to hit the next string. And it's just a little bit easier, especially in the slower stages. And then once it's faster, your hand's just going to be moving through like that. But in the slower stages, it's very important to develop these good habits, which again, we'll talk about here in a second. So if I were to do this with my technique, my pick and fingers with just dead notes, it would sound like this. Even there, I'm starting to notice a couple little tendencies that I need to iron out. I just kind of need to get into the habit of doing it. Let me see if I can do a little faster. Again, it's the same sort of thing. I'm noticing little areas where I'm speeding up, maybe playing too slow, I'm overcompensating, whatever it is, and I will try to fix those issues when I'm practicing. So that's the first thing, timing. Once the timing is down, honestly, everything else will kind of happen naturally because the timing is the most difficult part about this technique. So once that's there, everything else will happen pretty much. The other thing that I think is important is note definition. So what I mean by that is making sure the notes that you're playing are coming out loud and clear. Often when people practice this technique, especially if they're using the common like major or minor shapes like that, because those are literal chords, what some people will do is they'll just instinctively play it like a chord. So they'll hold all of the notes down longer than they should, and you'll get this like that kind of chord sound, which if you're going for that, that's great. You should definitely do that. But if you're approaching this technique in the moment as more of a lead sound, you need to approach the left hand like a lead. You can't hold the fingers down. They have to lift when you're done. So if I do the shape we've been talking about, as opposed to this, right, you're hearing the notes bleed together. Which is, of course, there's nothing wrong with that. It's a cool sound, but in the lead context, especially if you're playing with distortion and you're going for the cleanest sound possible, you need to make sure that the timing between the two hands, especially lifting the notes up here, is exactly the same as the pick stroke, right? You don't want to be holding that note over or bleeding that note over into the next note, because that's where you get kind of the messy sound that can happen, or the mushy sound that can happen when you're not picking the notes up or picking your fingers up on time to get that clean note. It's honestly kind of why I like to use picking fingers. Another reason why I think the note definition is just way clearer or way easier to achieve with this technique than it is with the sweep like that. But again, that's just my opinion. You don't have to do it. But I personally like the way it sounds. It kind of almost sounds like choppy on the way up, which I kind of like. It makes those notes like really punch out. Personally, I like that kind of thing. But you again, don't have to do this, but definitely keep in mind these things. You know, focus on the timing. That's the most important thing. Make sure the notes are not bleeding together as you're running through. Make sure the synchronization is happening. And a lot of that has to do with practicing this stuff slow. So as we move on to this backing track, there's one more thing I do want to say. So the last thing I want to say before we start this backing track is, please, for the love of all things that are good on this planet, do not practice this technique faster than you are capable of. So many people, including myself, when they first see this technique, they're seeing someone just go crazy, up and down the fretboard like crazy, and they think, oh, well, that's what I need to do whenever I'm practicing this technique, because this guy's doing it. That's what I'm going to do, just move my hand up and down really fast. Most people do that, like I said, including myself. But the difference between me and a lot of people that I've taught is I would do that and immediately realize, oh, I sound terrible. Let me slow this down so that I have control over what I'm doing, and then slowly build it up. If you do that, if you start slow, work out the kinks of the timing and the note separation and everything like I talked about, this technique will be more than just a gimmick or like a party trick that you can use. It will be a part of your technique, and so many things will be so much easier to play when you can do this cleanly and comfortably in any situation with any pattern. If you only practice this stuff fast, you're only going to be able to use it fast. And to be honest, it won't even be that clean because you're developing bad habits like not paying attention to the timing or the note separation and whatnot. And you'll turn into one of those players that use a ton of distortion, play the corny major or minor arpeggios up and down super fast as a gimmick, right? You don't want to do that. I mean, unless you want to do that, if that's the type of player you want to be, if you want to use it as a gimmick to impress your friends or whatever, like that's cool. But if you actually want to use this technique in whatever way you want, you have to play it slow, figure out the quirks and the kinks of the timing. Once you're there, once you have that timing really comfortable at slow tempos, and you can start to increase it, and it's still comfortable at all of those other tempos, the sky's the limit in regards to how fast you can play it. It's just how fast can your hands keep up with the tempo. That's it. The coordination issues will not be there if you play it slow. But if you play it fast, you're always going to have cleanliness issues, coordination issues. You know, you'll play shapes and you'll only hear like the first note and the last note. You won't hear all the notes in between. That's a really common thing that I hear that I think is hilarious. Yeah, you don't want that to happen. You know, it's okay to play like that, but you always want to shoot for playing as clean and connected and coordinated as possible. So always play these shapes slow, either the ones we're doing today or any of the other shapes that you'll ever learn throughout your life. Play them slow, and once you get that coordination down, everything will be way smoother for the rest of your life, really. So get these shapes down, and once you're ready, you can come back to this part of the video, and we'll start the backing track, which again runs from 60 to 120. All right, that does it for part 1 of this sweet picking power-up. If you enjoyed this type of instructional material, feel free to check out my Patreon at the link below, and I'll see you all in part 2.